Okay, so welcome to this Module 6A presentation on what it takes to work with the mentally ill. So, in this module, we'll cover important topics of mental health and mental illness. We'll start by learning what mental health is and how mentally healthy people cope with stressors in their life. We'll then discuss what mental illness is, what causes mental illness, and the signs of mental illness. We'll also learn about some specific mental health issues such as anxiety, depression, and schizophrenia. And we'll explore how mental illness is treated to help a person suffering from mental illness recover from their diseases. And finally, we'll discuss the role of a home health or personal caregiver in working with patients who suffer from mental illness. So, what is mental health? Everybody has mental health. Not everybody has mental illness. Just as physical health, mental health is an entity that everyone has. So, mental health is the ability to adjust to changes and stressors of life. Mentally healthy people are people who are able to adapt to life changes and stressful situations in positive ways. Mentally healthy people are able to communicate their thoughts and their feelings effectively. They're able to accept affection and love. They're able to give affection and love. They're able to accept and give compliments and praises. They're able to get along with and cooperate with others. They can listen to and respect those around them. They can control their impulses. They see consequences of action and they tolerate a certain amount of anxiety and frustration. They take responsibility for actions and decisions. Now, they do not blame themselves or others for what has gone wrong. They respect themselves and others, and they accept disappointments and understand that things do not always go their way, neither do they have to always go their way. And they're able to employ positive coping mechanisms to deal with the stressors of life. Mental health is important for a good physical health. And having good coping skills is helpful for people to deal with changes that occur throughout their lifespan. If a person has positive coping skills and good mental health, they'll be better able to deal with changes that occur if they or a loved one experience physical illness or disability. Everybody becomes stressed, anxious, or depressed from time to time. And when we're under a great amount of stress, even someone who is mentally healthy can begin to exhibit some poor coping mechanisms. This is normal once the stress is out of our normal threshold of tolerance. Now, the difference between a mentally healthy person and someone who is not healthy is that a mentally healthy person already has positive coping mechanisms and they will eventually be able to start using these positive coping mechanisms after they've recovered from the initial shock or the extreme stress that they are going through. So then, what are some positive coping skills? Ability to talk about our feelings with a trusted person, ability to write our feelings and thoughts down on paper, such as in a journal. When we engage in creative outlets, such as writing, poetry, working on art, creating music, cooking, building something, completing an activity, working on an hobby, or learning new skills. Those are considered positive coping skills. Then, when we use self-talks to help one see the positive of a situation instead of the negative, those are called positive coping skills. And when we learn to forgive others when we are angry or disappointed, when they're able to turn to one's religious or spiritual belief, those are some positive coping mechanisms. Then some persons will engage in physical activity or exercise. Then ability to set goals that are achievable in planning for the future. Meditation like yoga, deep breathing, and other relaxation techniques are also coping mechanisms. Then prayer or attending a religious service or even speaking with a clergyman are coping mechanisms for persons who are spiritual. Then ability to look at the situation objectively in order to be more positive and realistic is a positive coping mechanism. Then when we accept responsibility for our own part in a situation and figure out how not to do those same behaviors next time. And of course, spending time with family and friends, meeting new people, those are positive coping mechanisms. Now, what are some negative mechanisms, the coping mechanisms that people would employ or someone who is mentally unhealthy will employ? Excessively worrying or obsessing about a situation, blaming oneself for situations in which one has no control, seeking revenge to get even with someone who caused you harm, withdrawing or isolating from others, and oversleeping just in order not to feel, not to think, not to address the challenging issue, or not even sleeping enough because they spend the whole night worrying or obsessing about the situation. Then overeating, just trying to stuff the emotions, the distressing feeling with food, or being so worried that they can't sit to eat, not eating enough. Then some people would smoke just to experience the euphoric effect and be able to escape from the challenging or stressing situation for a while. Those are all negative coping mechanisms. Also, excessive consumption of alcohol in a bid to numb the pain, to numb the distress, or using alcohol or illegal substances to dull the pain or make them forget about the pain. Those are negative coping mechanisms. Then someone who engages in impulsive behaviors, such as spending a lot of money, having unsafe sex, or making big decisions without carefully considering the consequences. Those are negative coping mechanisms. Then procrastinating and hoping that things get better, even though you're not dealing with them. Those are negative coping mechanisms. So what are defense mechanisms? Defense mechanisms that we use to deal with stressful situations or thoughts are often unconscious, so we're not aware that we are using them. And they are used because they can help protect us from the unpleasantness of a situation or from having feelings of guilt, feelings of shame, feelings of rage, or profound sadness. The truth is, at one point or the other, everyone would use defensive mechanisms, even in persons who are mentally healthy. But people who are mentally ill or those with poor coping skills would use defense mechanisms more often. It's not healthy to use defense mechanisms on a regular basis because doing so will prevent you from truly understanding and being able to change a situation or from effectively coping with one's stressors. So, what are some unhealthy coping mechanisms? Projection is one of such, that is, making excuses or blaming others for one's behavior or action. For example, a child who throws toys at their sibling and says, "She made me do it because she made me mad." That individual is projecting and is failing to take responsibility for the wrong he or she has done. Rationalizing, and when we rationalize, one will try to justify the situation. Like a teenager who steals something from the store could tell her parent, but everybody does it. So she's trying to justify her reason for stealing because fellow teenagers are also stealing. Regressing or becoming more mature, an adult may begin to throw temper tantrums, pout like a child, or a child who is already toilet trained may begin to wet the bed when they're experiencing some stressful situation. Denial of thoughts or feelings about a situation. For example, a person who is angry at their spouse will pretend that they are not angry. Or even when they're asked, "Are you mad at me?" And they say, "No, no, no, no." They're not angry, even when they're asked. So the person is in denial. Repressing is blocking out or forgetting a bad situation. For example, an adult who was sexually abused as a child forgets that they were sexually abused, so they repress such a memory. Compensation is making up for a lack in one area or having done something wrong by being good in another. For example, a man who cheats on his wife can decide to bring flowers home and take her out to dinner to make up for what he did. Now, some people could also demonstrate avoidance. as a coping mechanism. For example, a wife avoids to go to the hospital to visit a friend because her husband passed away in that same hospital recently. So that's a form of avoidance. Then displacing, these are feelings about a person or situation to another. So one may displace one's feelings about a person or a situation to another. Now, a patient who lost his leg is angry about the situation, but he can't change the situation and he can't really express his anger to the situation. So what does he do? He takes out his anger on his family by yelling at them. So what is mental illness? Similar to any physical disease, mental illness is a disease. It disrupts a person's thinking, feeling, moods, ability to relate to other people, and to function at home, work, or school. People with mental illness are often unable to effectively cope with stressors, and mental illness may cause inappropriate behaviors. It may cause a person to be confused, to be disoriented towards others and events around them. And such persons may become agitated or even aggressive, or they may exhibit depressive behaviors. Now, it's important to remember that a person with a mental illness did not do something wrong to get the mental illness. They cannot control having the mental illness. Just the same way someone with cancer cannot control having cancer. They can at best have some preventive mechanisms in place, but that is not a guarantee in any way. So they cannot just get over their disease. And mental illness does not discriminate. It will happen to a young person, to an old person, to a male, to a female. And it affects people of all ages, all culture, all religion, all socioeconomic status, and all gender. So it's important to know that while mental illness can cause great disruption to a person's life, it is treatable and recovery is possible. So what are some common examples of mental illness? That would include depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, post-traumatic stress disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, phobias. There are a number of phobias to creatures like lizard, phobias to creatures like spider and ants. Then bipolar disorder is also a form of mental health disorder. So now, according to National Alliance on mental illness, 1 in 4 adults would experience a mental disorder in a given year, which amounts to about 60 million. That is quite a staggering statistic. So for every 4 persons you know, one of them will go through some mental health disorder. Is on spectrum anyway, from very mild to very severe in any given year. And 1 in 17 of these persons live with a serious mental illness, such as schizophrenia, bipolar, or major depression. And 1 in 10 children has an emotional or mental health disorder. Now, suicide, a serious problem that is related to mental illness, is the 10th leading cause of death in the United States. As you can see, mental health disorders would affect many people, and really it can have some very serious consequences. So now, it's not just specific to the United States, it's across board. Goes through the whole length and breadth of all countries of the world. According to the World Health Organization, WHO, depression affects about 400 million people globally. That again is a staggering statistics. Bipolar disorder affects about 60 million people worldwide. Schizophrenia affects about 21 million people worldwide. Mental health disorders really can have these devastating consequences. And suicide is a very real threat, particularly for those who suffer from mental health disorder. According to WHO again, 1 million people commit suicide worldwide per year. Averagely, that will be about 1 death every 40 seconds. That again is a sobering statistic. So the 10 to 24-year-old age group is the highest risk for suicide. So the stigma that follows mental disorders is a viewing of people with mental illness in an unfavorable or negative way. It's common in many places. And what does this lead to? It can lead to people with mental illness not reporting symptoms and not wanting to seek treatment. According to World Health Organization, approximately 76 to 85% of people who suffer from mental illness in low to middle income countries do not receive treatment, while 35% to 50% of people in high income countries do not receive treatment. So you have a higher number in the low to middle income countries not receiving treatment, about 85%. Now, many people do not receive treatments they need due to lack of resources, poor quality care, lack of social support, and of course, the stigma that a lot of people have towards mental health disorders. So some persons will not even just turn up to present their symptoms or their complaints at all. So as a caregiver, you can work to treat people with respect and learn to identify the signs of mental health disorders in order to assist the people with whom you work to receive the care they need, should they suffer from mental health disorders in any way or the other. So what are some causes of mental illness? There are physical factors, there are environmental factors, and there are genetic factors. So now we discuss physical factors. Physical illnesses, disability, or even the process of aging can cause or make mental illness worse. Substance abuse or intoxication from alcohol or other drugs may mask mental illness. So this means that the people who abuse alcohol or drugs on a regular basis may have an underlying mental illness and not even know it. So they use alcohol and drugs as a coping mechanism. This is because some of the signs and symptoms of mental illness are similar to the behavior of an intoxicated person. So you're not sure if this person has a mental illness or he or she is just intoxicated. Now, according to NAMI, about 9.2 million adults in the US have both a mental illness and a substance abuse problem. So it's like a dual diagnosis. They have two disorders because substance abuse is a disorder, mental illness is a disorder. So a person who has had traumatic brain injury, maybe let me say suffered damage to the brain from a trauma, accident, or the likes, they may also end up with changes in their personality, in their cognition ability to think, in their mood, and in their behavior. Chemical imbalances in the brain can cause mental illness. So the brain has naturally occurring chemicals that are called neurotransmitters. And it's thought that changes in these neurotransmitters may cause mental illness. Changes in hormonal levels can also cause mental health disorders. So what are some environmental factors that can cause mental illness? There has been some research indicating that exposure to certain viruses, chemicals, or alcohol in the womb may also be linked to a person having mental illness later on in life. Then traumatic life experiences such as being in a combat or experiencing sexual abuse or rape may also lead to mental illness. Genetic factors or genes which we inherit are also thought to have a role in mental illness. Mental illness has a strong genetic basis. What does that mean? It means that it tends to run in families. People are more likely to have a mental illness if their parents or close relatives also have a mental illness. Now, this does not mean that if your mother or your father has a mental illness that you will automatically have one. It just means that the chances are higher if a parent has a mental illness. So the chances of the child developing it is higher. It's not 100% guarantee. And it is believed that environmental factors and stressors may trigger these inherited genes to result in mental illness. So why the gene will load the gun, as we commonly say in the medical field? Our lifestyle, environmental factors, stressors, and a number of other things would ultimately activate the gun, or in this case, activate the inherited gene for such disorder, in this case, mental illness, to begin to play out. Now, stress factors. Mental illness may be brought about by stressors, such as a traumatic event or poor interpersonal relationship with a loved one. If someone has a difficult breakup or the death of a partner or a child, or they had a loss of job, or a favorite pet died in places where they are so given to pets, it can lead to a mental illness. So people may have difficulty coping during stressful situations, and they may display signs and symptoms that are similar to those persons who have mental illness. So in many cases, after the initial reaction to the traumatic event and after the person has received them, the signs and symptoms would oftentimes go away. So this is not a mental illness, this is just a stress response to a traumatic event. So what are the types of mental illness? Anxiety is a very common type. Anxiety disorders are a group of disorders in which people feel anxious, frightened, distressed, or terrified to an extent that is more excessive than it would be considered appropriate to the situation. So the fear, the distress, the terror they feel is out of proportion to the situation at hand. And this can interfere with a person's life so much that the person with anxiety would have trouble functioning in their everyday life. It can lead people to become depressed. They may have low self esteem. They may abuse substances. They may have suicidal thoughts. And anxiety disorders are very common, but they're also very treatable. A common type of anxiety disorder is generalized anxiety disorder. And this is when people have anxiety every day for at least 6 months and interferes with their ability to function in their everyday lives. They may feel constantly worried and feel physical symptoms such as palpitations, trouble breathing, nausea, headaches, etc. Most of us worry and have anxiety at one time or the other. The difference is that we can use positive coping skills to deal with our worries. For people with generalized anxiety disorder, do not necessarily worry about something in particular. They are just unable to use positive coping skills, so everything worries them. They are constantly worried about just the state of being. Now, generalized anxiety disorder over time can lead to depression, can lead to substance abuse, can lead to loss of employment because they will not be able to deliver, they're not so functional at their place of work, can lead to loss of relationships, and can lead to suicidal thoughts ultimately. Phobias are another type of anxiety disorder. In this situation, the person has an abnormal fear about something in particular. For example, some people may have a fear of germs, spiders, fear of heights, being outside a home, fear of crowds, closed spaces, water, or animal. So most people have fears about one thing or the other. But the difference is that even though they are scared of that thing, they're able to function when they are faced with this fear. But a person with phobia has an irrational fear, such that the fear looks and seems unreasonable. They become unable to function in the face of these fears. And in some cases, there may not even be a reason for the fear. And in other cases, the person may have had a bad experience which has led to excessive fear about the particular situation. Now, OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, is another type of anxiety disorder in which the person has repetitive thoughts, that's the obsession, and repetitive behaviors, that's the compulsion. And these repetitive thoughts and behaviors would impede or interfere with the individual's ability to function in their everyday life. For example, a person who has a fear of germs may obsess, they will just keep thinking about getting germs, scared about everything. But now to compensate for that, the compulsion they carry out is that they spend a lot of time washing hands. They can wash hands to the point of getting injured and their skins are beginning to crack. But the continuous thought of the fear of the germ never goes away. They wash again, they feel a bit better. The fear comes again, they go to wash. So it's a vicious cycle. And such persons may wash their hands for hours, leading to them missing work. their hand can get raw, can even start to bleed. Now, post-traumatic disorder called PTSD is also another type. And this would usually follow someone having experienced a traumatic event, such as rape, abuse, sexual abuse, or a natural disaster, someone who went to combat, like post-war veterans, or someone who experienced severe distress. So afterwards, they could have PTSD. And these people may have flashbacks, so they can replay the events in their mind. They can have insomnia, that's trouble sleeping. They may have nightmares of the event, and they constantly feel on edge, irritable, scared, or angry. So it's normal for people to experience these things right after a traumatic event. The difference is that a person with PTSD is unable to function in their everyday life and to cope with their thoughts and feelings in a positive way. And they feel that no matter what they do, they cannot get back to normal long after the traumatic event is past. Now, depression is another type of mental illness that is quite common, and it may involve extreme sadness, insomnia, trouble concentrating. They may overeat or undereat. They may abuse substances. They may have very bad guilt, thoughts of suicide. Depression often results in a disruption of a person's ability to function normally in their life, and they may have trouble getting out of bed, performing self-care, caring for their children, or even going to work. Depression, if it's left untreated, can result in suicide, and suicide is the 10th leading cause of death in United States. Now, in the elderly, depression is very common, and it's something that you as the caregiver want to monitor for when you're working with elderly. So some people may have one episode of depression, while others can experience recurrent depression or depression that occurs periodically. So it's important to assist a person with depression to seek help. Depression is very treatable with proper treatment. So now schizophrenia is a serious mental illness that impacts someone's ability to think clearly, to make decisions, to have relationships with others, to manage stress and emotions, and to function in their everyday lives. People with schizophrenia have psychosis. Now, psychosis is a loss of contact with reality. So they may have delusions, that's abnormal thoughts, that if you listen to such a person's thoughts, it sounds quite abnormal. They may have hallucinations, so they may see or hear things or even feel things that are not real. So they can hear voices telling them to do something, and you deal with them and you cannot hear any of such similar voice. Delusions may demonstrate paranoia, that is thinking someone is out to hurt you. Their behavior may be bizarre. For example, a person with schizophrenia may not dress appropriate to the weather. They may become catatonic, that's they are motionless, they're not moving any muscle, any body parts. They may have repeated movement of body parts and speech that is disorganized, speech that just does not make sense. A person with schizophrenia may also have sleeping and eating problems. They may have inability to relate to others. They may have trouble providing self-care for themselves. So now people with schizophrenia, they are at very high risk of suicide because those same boys may tell them to kill themselves. They may just be frustrated with the complexity and the distress of the existence. But most people with schizophrenia are not dangerous to other people because when people hear that, they just feel these are dangerous people. They are more dangerous to themselves than they are to other people. But with medication, support from others, and the help of a psychiatrist and therapist, a person with schizophrenia can usually begin to regain the ability to function within the community. So how do we treat mental illness? It's important to know that while mental illness can have long-term effect on a person's physical, psychological, and social functioning, many people can recover and lead normal lives. And there are many types of treatment available. The most common type of treatment include medication and psychotherapy. So it's extremely important for a person with mental illness to take their medications as prescribed. And you, the caregiver, you may come to observe the patients who do not take their medication as prescribed. It's vital, it's essential that your patient takes their medication, and you want to report such to your supervisor and document such findings. Now, a person who is suffering from a severe form of mental illness and who is unable to help themselves may need to be hospitalized for a period of time. But most of such persons will receive outpatient treatment, and such patients meet with a psychiatrist, that's a physician who specializes in treating mental health disorders. They discuss their thoughts, their feelings, and of course, they obtain prescription to manage the mental illness. They may also meet with a mental health therapist or a social worker to talk about their thoughts and feelings and to learn better ways to cope with their stressors. Some people go to individual therapy, those are therapy focused on one person, and others may go to a group therapy where many people with similar problems meet a therapist just to talk about the problem and proffer solutions to them. So a common form of treatment of mental disorder is called cognitive behavioral therapy. And this treatment focuses on how a person's thoughts, feelings, and behaviors are related. Patients are taught to recognize negative self-talk. Negative self-talk, those are things that we tell ourselves in our head, positive or negative, but in this case, the negative self-talk. And then to turn these thoughts into more positive ones. And many times the more positive thoughts lead to improved mood and behavior. Okay, so with that, we come to the end of this presentation. Thank you very much for staying with me.